Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're watching and listening to the Cosmic Switchboard show. Today, I got my friend Jeremiah back to talk about his experiences. He's had some recent interesting dreams and experiences, which I think are relative to what's going on today. So, without any further ado, Jeremy, welcome back to the Cosmic Switchboard show.
Hey, how are you doing, James? It's
I'm
great to be
doing
back.
likewise. Great to have you back. Well, I'd just like to start this off by saying a lot of people that went through Milab training back in the old days, let's say, for whatever reason, we seem to be getting prepped or prepared for some kind of apocalyptic, climatic endgame scenario sometime in the future. So a lot of the training revolved around escape and evasion, survival skills, foraging. There was a lot of physical training, endurance training involved, weapons training, et cetera, et cetera. And now fast forward to the present time when that insane administration over there, they're trying to reinstitute the draft. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think they've already put it in place. So it looks like they're getting ready or have the intention at some point to start drafting large numbers of Americans to fight in another, not just a senseless war, but an insane war. And this is where the twain meets, where the training that people like myself and others in the old days received, and then now we have in real time someone like yourself who's gone through a lot of these MyLab experiences and training experiences, but you're starting to have dreams, promptings, some degree of encouragement, let's say, or perhaps even coercion to get involved in this whole war effort. And before we go there, I'd also like you to talk about the situation on the ground. I don't want to specify where you're at. You're somewhere along, not too far from the southern border in America. So you get to see
Correct.
for yourself what this immigrant invasion is all about. So please, Jeremiah, the floor is yours. Start wherever you want.
So I'll start with basically the preparation of my generation. So automatic registration has started from ages 18 to 26. We know that now that a House bill was passed. So prior to that House bill being passed, had you not registered yourself for a potential draft for the potential draft in the future, it was a felony. And now that's not in your hands anymore. The government's taking it into their hands, and so automatically, the day you turn 18, your name's in the system. And if there's a draft, hey buddy, you're getting called, or there's a chance that you can be called. So when you take my generation into consideration, from a very young age, we've been playing video games that the generations prior to us did not have, whether it's like first person shooters, Call of Duty, Battlefield, these games that we've been playing. The subconscious cannot differentiate these things from reality. So when you're spending 10 hours a day, and I will say that the average male my age in their early 20s or younger has well over 100 hours of playing these games where it's first person shooter, there's adrenaline, it's combat. We grew up fighting. There was a very reptilian upbringing to our adolescence, right? If you look at my generation, and this is not to disrespect the generation prior to mine, but in the early 2000s, there were a lot of young 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds who were in the corporate world. They were heavy set. They had families. They had kids. A lot of happy folks back then. Nowadays, the 20-year-olds, it's like we've been ushered out of relationships into the gym. And you see this on social media platforms alike, where we have young men who are just, every man my age is walking around with a broken heart. We've been exposed to so much violence on social media in real life, in real time. We've been exposed to so it's not just my lab. It's people who are in my age group who have been exposed to this immense amount of violence, this reptilian upbringing. Nowhere to turn. Our parents don't want anything to do with this to some degree if we're not making enough money or doing what they intended for us to do. We really can't rely on we can't fall back on relationships for any level of emotional support as some of the generations prior to us used to. women, they want millionaires and they want the hottest, nicest. So you have a generation of angry men, young men at that, who are just so happen to be 18 to 26. So, like I said, it's not just my lab. I had an immense amount of experiences that would have prepped not only my subconscious but my conscious mind to be able to endure battle or endure warfare as I have, and um, has been simulated in my mind prior to the current day. So yeah, it's a crazy, it's all orchestrated, and you can see it for what it is. You can genuinely see it for what it is.
Well, thank you for bringing that up because there's a lot to unpack there. Because I think of the uh, where they have the virtual reality simulation for Army infantry in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, down by the border, and all kinds of weird, spooky things go on in that place too. I've spoken to veterans going way back. So they have at that facility the means to train soldiers in a virtual reality environment. And then you see how that dovetails with a lot of the Milab virtual reality, astral dreamscape virtual reality training, where one is put through their paces. And in many cases, I'm not saying uh, a blanket generalization of all such experiences, but sometimes the training and experiences very well takes on this uh, virtual reality video game Tron-like aspect to it, right? Where one is being put through their paces, doing room clearing or being involved in urban combat,
Right,
etc. And what it does, like you pointed out, is it dovetails with the programming, for lack of a better term, that a lot of younger people, like in your generation and coming afterwards, all the video games they played, these shoot 'em up video games, they used to have, I don't know if they still do. I think the game is Counter-Strike. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they used to have there in Texas and probably in other states as well, these Counter-Strike conventions where the US Army would send out invitations, and then these kids would form in what they called clans, and then they'd battle each other remotely. To have modem will travel. That was in the old days, and nowadays the bandwidth is so much better. 5G, right? But
right,
point being is the army, elements within the army, they monitor the proficiency, if you will, of a lot of these kids in these clans playing these shoot 'em up warfare games with other clans. And then the top scorers of these clans get invited to a conference that the army puts together, these Counter-Strike conferences, where these kids compete with each other at these facilities, right? And I'm thinking, what a perfect, ideal setup to find some people, whether at a surface level or at a subsurface mind control level, kids that are already heavily steeped in these violent shoot 'em up video games. And another quick point, I'd like your thoughts on it. You brought up another aspect of how this whole thing all ties together. The difficulty uh, guys in your age bracket have to find a meaningful relationship, to find a woman who could be the bedrock of a family to be, to settle down with, to support you, to have a mutually beneficial relationship. How difficult that is today because so many men prefer to stay single. And I'm not heaping all this blame on women, but this is the baneful result of all these waves of femininity, or rather feminism. Take that back, not femininity. It's quite the opposite. It's just the second, third, fourth wave of feminism. And you
right.
can see the disastrous effect it's had in specific ethnic demographics in America in particular and across the board, where there's a lot of young women that grow up with this entitled mentality. Their value system is all warped, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're almost conditioned by this, ironically, patriarchal reptilian system into rejecting, and I'm not just crying in my spilt milk about the nice guy syndrome, although I really do believe there's something to that. But the programming that so many young women have been subjected to makes them almost in knee-jerk fashion reject a guy who comes off as nice, respectful. Uh, it's almost as if they're lacking in certain uh, desirable attributes, such as like, somewhat dangerous, somewhat predatory, somewhat
Yeah.
manipulative and narcissistic, right? Women are
Right.
Many women are programmed to seek out that kind of male. So if a guy comes along, hardworking, accountable, wants to have a family, he's given short shrift. So you see how this all ties together, because then you have these guys who are essentially lone rangers, and what have the intelligence services, secret services, black ops been looking for all this time, for decades now. Single males, and you can break down the psych profile even more. Domineering, narcissistic, abusive mother, absentee or weak father, right? And I just
Right.
described, 70% of the black community there, because of what illegitimacy and the disastrous impact that feminism has had in the black culture. You can see it playing out all the time. So I just wanted to throw that. Anything you wanted to add to that? And also, if you want to talk about what it's like there on the ground as far as the immigrant invasion is concerned.
Okay. Yeah. As far as dating's concerned, it's for the birds. We're not taking any liking to that anymore. It's over with. That I don't think people who are older than us, I don't think they realize how demonic it's gotten. It's horrific. It's every single relationship you get into where it's this status quo, and this adulterous behavior where there is no loyalty. There is no loyalty. The dating game has been completely hijacked by some interdimensional parasite feeding off of lower vibrational emotions, and that's just what it is. And as young men, when you're looking at 18 to 26-year-olds, the only ones of us who remain are the ones that they wanted. There were a lot of suicides in our age gap, in our age group. A lot of suicides. I mean, we're talking about statistics that weren't even recorded on paper. We're talking about mass suicide. We're talking about only the strongest will survive. So when you talk to someone in the age group from 18 to 26, and I've sat down with groups of people who are my age at this point, men who are my age, you know, um, and they're all saying the same thing. They all have broken hearts. They all went through this, and they have heart. They can't afford housing. They have to room together. I mean, it's like it's really it's rough right now. So you do have some very, very strong, angry 18 to 26-year-olds right now who are fed up and just ready, war ready, as we've been made. And yeah, we're still all willing to defend our country, despite it being as corrupt as it is. We're willing to defend the people here on this land. And yeah, I mean, it's from that, and then it delves off into immigration, where you have these foreigners in our land, and we know, you know, they're not even willing to learn our language. They're that entitled. They come here and they're expecting handouts, and they're expecting, just to be paid, and they're not going to learn our language. They're not going to respect our boundaries. They're not going to respect our rules. They've come here. They're extremely predatory. The vast majority of them are criminals being let out of these jails and these maximum security prisons in these other countries. And they're here, and they want to take what's ours, and we're not gonna stand for it. We're not having it. Um, it's the local supermarkets, it's the bus stops, it's any public place at this point. Women are terrified to go out alone at this point. They can't really trust their own communities, and that's sad to say. Just what has been done in this country is it's almost, it seems like it's irreversible at this point. But we have high hopes, and we hope to see some change moving forward. But yeah, It's nothing short of horrific. It's nothing short of yeah, nightmare. It's a nightmare, really is.
Going back to the Milab training and the apocalyptic scenarios that a lot of us in the old days were uh, confronted with in these training scenarios, they included foreign army occupation, including former Eastern Bloc, Chinese, even Chinese CCP, and also like this vast influx of immigrants, right? And
Right.
these people, like you point out, that are being brought here, they are of a predatory hunter class from extremely misogynistic societies. So many of them, either they're hardcore communist felons that have been let out of communist prisons, and communists in general, especially from Latin America, and also from the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Near East, the Horn of Africa, just hordes of these Islamist fighters that are just steeped in this medieval sixth, seventh century mentality of conquest, of decapitations, of mutilation. This, you know, normal kids grow up thinking about normal things, but from an early
Right.
age, they're thinking about stabbing, knifing, and raping and stoning. It's just steeped in their DNA and it's steeped in their ideology. And then you bring them into a largely pacified Europe that has been disarmed for generations, that has been subjected to generations of cultural socialist propaganda. So it's created, uh, Jeremiah, by this point, generations of very weak males. And that's the problem too. So on the one hand, like you were pointing out, you have a large demographic of kids that have been primed to go to war and to conduct combat. On the other hand, you got large segments of society that have been turned into a bunch of soy boys. I'm talking strictly from a male perspective. And then if you look at like the greatest generation to this day to me was the generation that survived the Great Depression, went into World War II, malnourished and underfed, right?
There you go.
And fought and won a two-front war against some of the most implacable foes in history, right? The
Right.
Japanese Imperial Army in Asia and in the Pacific, along with their Japanese Naval Special Landing Forces, sometimes called Japanese Marines. Those guys were hardcore, and they took no prisoners, and they did, but they tortured the hell out of them if they didn't outright execute them. So, point
Right.
being is that foes of that caliber have already been defeated and bested, and it's in the genetic memory of a lot of people in Europe to be fighters, to stand and defend your ground and retake lost ground and protect your families, right? And see, it's
Mm-hmm.
baffling to me. Like if you look at what's happened in Ireland, for example, for decades, Protestants and Catholics had this tit for tat violence. Oh, you shoot one of our guys, we'll shoot two of yours. You do something over here, we'll set off a bomb over there, right?
Right.
And they'll have their kids throw petrol bombs, Molotov cocktails at the British armored personnel carriers, and and take shots at the soldiers in the street. But fast forward to today, right? A lot of these Irish, I'm not just picking on them, but I'm just using them as an example because of the mass influx of immigrants. They're starting to be outnumbered, and at this point, it's they're getting hammered for both ends.
Mm-hmm.
It's dangerous to walk the streets, and because of this Luciferian cultural Marxist Frankfurt School setup, if they even complain about it, they go to jail, right? Because
Right.
the intention is to eradicate the white European heritage races right off the map. Just get rid of them, right? Because they're seen as the main adversary to this whole Luciferian system. But I just want to remind those Irish and all the people in the UK and all the people in Europe, you come from a tradition of fighters. You've overcome this kind of stuff in the past. Don't forget that, right? You've
There you
overcome
go.
much more. You've survived invasions by the Huns, by the Mongols, by the Goths, the Visigoths, et cetera, et cetera. It's in your genetic uh, DNA profile to survive all these things. So always remember where you came from, folks, if you're under this kind of attack. And we're seeing more and more of that in America now. because you have these blue cities where it's anything goes, catch and release the predators and the criminals, and then bring in even more to make life even worse. So tell us once again what it's like on the ground there, and where do these immigrants in your area seem to be coming from? What parts of the world, and what's their behavior like generally?
Well, like I said, the strongest will always survive. So yeah, that was a very positive message that you left at the end of that. Because people can get very pessimistic when they hear things like that, but people don't realize the history and the bloodshed that has gone into our survival. If you're alive now, you come from warriors. Best believe it. The weakest of the genome is always eradicated, unfortunately, for the mass genocide that has taken place on this planet. Many died, but the strongest did survive. What it's like on the ground, like I said, is it's just like having a bunch of people who feel entitled to land that's not theirs, and just for the most part rude. They might mad dog you, they might stare you down, and I'm a big guy. Like I'm not real big, but I mean height. I'm 6 feet tall. A lot of these guys are like 5'2", 5'3", but I think they run in packs more, numbers. And yeah, I mean, I haven't had any particular problems. Like I said, there's something about my programming where I just have like this I have this straight face. Like I have this people think that I'm in the military. A lot of places I go. Like I went to get some Italian food with my buddy like a couple weeks ago. The guy who ran the store, he's like, "You're in the Navy, right?" I could just tell. I was like, "No, I'm not." And I've had that on numerous occasions where I get like I even get free food sometimes. They think I'm like a cop, or they think I'm in the military or something. So I kind of have this look. But for someone who's of smaller stature, these people might want to pick you off or target you, or think that you're a good, uh, yeah, think that you'd be easy to rob or take advantage of. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying to think of. But yeah, I mean, there just is that no church in the wild kind of mentality going on down here, where people are just you can kind of feel that um there's no real defense. These people are the wolf is in the hen house, so to speak.
So if you look at what some of the commie governors and commie state legislatures have done over there, they've publicly announced that they're in some states are giving zero interest loans to immigrants, and in California, not only are they doing that, but they're giving them up to 125 grand to make a down payment for a home when they've made it so difficult. I've got friends in the building industry over there, and just the hurdles and uh, the blockages they're receiving just for wanting to, build and develop, but they go out of their way to create these developments for immigrants. And so now Governor Newsom, commie lizard boy Newsom, right? He's publicly announced they're going to be giving these large, basically interest-free loans to these immigrants, 125 grand to get in a home. So
Hmm.
at a time when Americans, people have paid into the system or had money taken out of their paychecks all these years to feed into the system, they're getting the shaft. You look at what they've done to the veterans, right? So many of them are homeless. So many of them have PTSD because of the multiple deployments they've gone on. You can see, Jeremiah,
Suicide.
the suicide, exactly. You can see what's happened. They've just radically destroyed the military in so many ways, and yet, paradoxically, it seems, they want to engage in all these wars. Now, in the time we got left in the first segment, unless you want to share this in the member segment, could you tell us a bit about uh, some of the dreams, promptings that you've been getting in the recent past? Because you talked about what they used to call selective service, the draft, in the recent past, uh, about how that's been passed and how they're expecting people, once they're 18, they're registered basically to become soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen. What's it been like in the recent past for you as far as, these conflicted uh, notions about whether to join or whether not to join? Well, they're trying to make it so you don't have a choice to join. But so please, in the time we got left in the first segment, Jeremiah, the floor is yours.
Real quick, I'll finish with this. Just having dreams, where they are trying to, I'm having these, I guess, telepathic communication via my dream and astroscape, where they're telling me that I should join the military and that, that's needed of me. And, I'm not afraid of that possibility, and I'm not necessarily saying, in the state that we're in, it's definitely a possibility. But I have something a little more important to say. I want people to know that they're ushering in a Luciferian utopia, a new world order. That's what's coming. That's what's coming. I want people to, and this is not too black pill, but I want us to assess the situation in case that we are in the worst possible predicament as a species. We are on the very outskirts of the Orion arm in the Milky Way galaxy. We are 20,000 light years away from, or virtually 20,000 light years away from what is going on in the center of the Milky Way galaxy, where most species are predicted to reside, right? Where William Tompkins says most of the life goes on. It's inner city. We're out in the boonies. We are out in the sticks in a reptilian meth lab. We are we have been kidnapped and abducted from some part of this galaxy or some other dimension. We know humans don't come from Earth, and we have been brought out to this planet, which is a laboratory, a reptilian laboratory. We know that for a fact. Um, as a soul, I think people should be focused on, after this lifetime, evacuating Earth and not getting so caught up in the karmic cycle. We are far from home, whether that's us being in a fractal holographic reality where we do have error correcting codes in the basis of reality. They found error correcting codes and binary codes in the basis of our reality. We are 100% in a simulation. But besides that point, let's not take simulation theory into consideration. Regardless, we are very far from any positive life in the cosmos. We are, like I said, on the outskirts, in the boonies, in the sticks. We, as a species, we've been scooped up from some plane, and we've been brought here to mine gold. And when I say that this is their laboratory, you're watching them. You're watching the Luciferian utopia manifest, and they're taking it back to Babylon. That's what they're doing. I just need people to. I need you to live, and I need you to survive, and be as strong as you can for the times to come. And like I said, it's not to black pill, but if we are in the worst predicament as a species, we need to assess that. But yeah,
That's a very
if
good
there's any,
point.
yeah.
Just to quickly interject that it's a fine line between, glass half full, glass half empty. And to black pill doesn't necessarily mean to sow defeatism, hopelessness, and despair. That's not what we're doing. But it's important to recognize the the multiple threat environment in which we reside, just how deep the manipulation and control goes. There's so many of these surface level truthers who still think to this day we're only up against a bunch of power mad bankers and institutions like the WEF. It's there's a reason why these perps that you see in these fronting these agencies and institutions look the way they do. It's because most of them are reptilian or Draco human hybrids. They have that icky. I mean, people like Bill Gates and Epstein and what have you, like all they're missing is scales. Nobody can tell me that they look like us. You can just see the hybridization in them, right? And so once we recognize the scale and of this monstrous manipulation, and we recognize that there are non-human players pulling the strings, so much the better, right? So anyway, I just want to throw that in.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I said, it's not to make anyone think from a pessimistic aspect, but you do have some of these new agers, there's no linear way out of this, folks. I'm here to tell you right now, there is no linear, like if you're waiting for something, you're waiting for us to land on the shore of peace and tranquility. It's not gonna happen, and there's something that needs to be done in the hearts, minds, and souls of every individual listening and every individual who seeks change. If you think that someone's coming back to save you, guess what? They thought that 3,000 years ago, and I'm not here to dispute anyone's beliefs. in any sense, for any sense of the matter, in any sense of the matter at all. But like I said, there's factually, we are in a reptilian laboratory, and there are so many belief systems that we're indoctrinated with that just keep us in a repetitive cycle. That, oh, we need to come back here, and for what? Why? Why do we keep coming back here? There's just this. Why are we bringing souls here? No one really understands. We're here. We're mining gold. We're mining gold. And we've kind of been. It's like we've been riding tidal wave after tidal wave of a change that people cannot adapt to in the time that they're expected to adapt to, and wars and just the endless bloodshed, bloodbath. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's just been going on and on. So like I said, a lot of New Agers, they just think that, let me just bliss out and things will pass over, and it's not the case. It's anything, could be anything further from that.
Well, that's part of the con as far as they're concerned. And it relates back to a lot of the Eastern traditions that preach nothingness, right? Just
Right.
tune out reality because it's Maya, it's all a delusion anyway. And never mind the grinding poverty and the misery and the wars and all this stuff, right? Just tune that all out because that's not where it's at. No, I beg to differ. That's exactly where you're at. And tuning that out isn't going to make it go away. And you hear this a lot from people in the truther community, right? Where there definitely seems to be a level of uh, denial about just how bad things have degenerated, because they're intent on turning the streets. They've already done this in Europe. Europe has gone down. That doesn't mean that Europe can't get back up. That doesn't mean that the largely what's left of the white races in Europe can stand up for themselves and retake, even though the odds are heavily tilted against them. Darkest days, darkest, always darkest before the dawn, all those cliches. But again, like I pointed out earlier, they'd managed to pull themselves from the brink in the past. But back then, the difference is they had a lot of real men. I mean, it baffles me when I look back at the long history of warfare in the UK and Britain, for example. Mainstream historians seem to, for whatever reason, date the start of England, the Norman conquest, 1066. No, it's like long before that. They were coming up with their own kings, their own warlords. They didn't need the Normans, who were really Vikings, to come along and, change their society. They were already well on the way of making their own society until the Norman invasion came along. So, point being is that they already had a an identity, right? The Mercian kings, et cetera, et cetera. We get this notion of the Dark Ages where it was just, people in England and Europe just primitive, living in hovels, but they were in the process of making civilization work for them, right? Long
Mm-hmm.
story short, but what they're doing now is they're bringing hordes of essentially uncivilized savages. And again, we go back to the concept of cultural relativism. That was the problem that we're dealing with now. This notion that all races, all ethnicities are inherently equal. That's nonsense. When you have large swaths of what passes for humanity, I would argue hybridized humanity, extremely hybridized, extremely misogynistic, extremely abusive, extremely steeped in pederasty, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing normal or equal about that. They're predatory by nature. So there's a huge influx of these predatory races and cultures and ethnicities in people that have been largely, the manhood has been largely emasculated by decades and decades of cultural socialism, cultural Marxism, the whole
Right.
soy boy manipulation. We just got a few minutes left in the first segment. Is there any things you want to touch on, and then we can do a deep dive in
Yeah.
the second segment?
Definitely, yeah. We're being RPG'd, folks. If you ever played a role playing game where you're essentially this creator, and you kind of just do with the armadas of neighboring tribes as you wish. That's what they're doing with us. We're in a simulation. Like I said, scientists, mainline scientists are coming out and saying it now that, hey, we can see gravity bleeding into this realm known as dark matter. Hey, there's error correcting codes. Professor Professor James Gates says computer code error correcting codes are fundamentally written into the equations used to describe our known universe, right? So we are in a simulation. There are error correcting codes in our genomes. It just your DNA is holographic in nature. Your DNA is holographic in nature. That's why um we all can shapeshift to some degree or another, but that's besides the point. Like I said, we're being RPG'd like a role-playing game. We're in one of those laboratory type simulations where they just kind of do what they want with the bodies of humanity. And we've seen this time and time again. Hey, I'd like to see this neighboring tribe go to war with this neighboring tribe, and it's just division, divisive, controlling. There's some higher being that is running this world that is kind of obsessed with bloodshed. I'll finish with this. Can I finish with this last thing?
Yeah, please, please.
I wrote this, the horrors of the infinite. The creator creates to the negligence of its own creations. Everything that could exist essentially does exist. God's mind paradoxically eats itself out of sheer boredom. All of God's creations mirror its self-consumption. The creation is and will always be a projection of the creator's mind. And that's just one perspective. That's one perspective. But just be strong, folks. I need you to survive. Keep fighting.
Yes, there's a demiurgic force that is not only afflicting our plane of existence in general and our planet in particular. I mean, I'm sure it's happening to other planets in the cosmos and in the multiverse, but this happens to be our mud ball and we have to deal with it. A few quick points and then we'll end this first segment. When you talk about like this puppet master playing both sides against the middle, I'm reminded of a couple of things that have to do with space as far as science fiction is concerned. We go back to the original Star Trek, and uh, Captain Kirk and his crew, they have a meeting. They're supposed to have this peaceful diplomatic meeting with I can't remember if they're Romulans or Klingons. But what happened was they began sending teams, and the Romulans and the Klingons, their abusive, foul nature, very much like this is Islamic kind of invasion force, right? Crude, no ethics, no morals, sadistic, right? So they began doing this. I don't know if it was cross training or whatever, where members of the Enterprise would go on to the alien ship, and aliens from either the Klingons or the Romulans, I can't remember, come over to the Enterprise. And what happened was this third force came in, this light force source snuck into the Enterprise, and it caused both sides to go into this like mouth foaming rage mode. And then this third force started manifesting swords, if you remember that episode. So the crew members of the Enterprise on their ship would be battling these Klingons and Romulans, but it would all be sword fighting. The most brutal type of sword fighting that's going on throughout history, which is being replayed in Europe with all these dagger and machete wielding fanatics, right? But
Oh wow.
the thing about it was in the Star Trek episode was the wounds were self healing, so they would just continually stab and gut each other over and over. The wounded would be taken back to sick bay. The wounds would heal themselves up, and they'd be right back into the fray, right? So somebody made a point in the show. One of the characters in the Enterprise is that it's like we've been forced to go back into this ancient form of warfare because it elicits the most horror, carnage, bloodshed, et cetera, et cetera. And then you look at Stargate Atlantis. There was an episode when the Stargate Atlantis away team, to use a Star Trek Next Generation term, they went to a planet where the military commander and the chief scientific advisor, I forget the doctor's name, they found in this habitation, this settlement, they encountered human beings there. They found what they thought was a game, okay, and they brought it back to uh, Atlantis, and they began playing what they thought was the game against each other, but they didn't realize that what that game was doing was it was connected to either a world or a number of worlds in a solar system somewhere in their galaxy. And everything one or the other player did on the video game, whether it was economic sabotage, whether it was like, cutting off like the food supplies of the other contestant, blockades, warfare, everything they were doing on the video game was being played out by these two civilizations on this in the star system, right? So, when you mention this, yes, because the Luciferian demiurgic force relies on this never-ending loosh harvest, unfortunately, at our expense. And now it's been taken to another level where so-called random attacks, nothing random about it. These are entity-infested people. And the entities within them come from some nether dimension and all they want to do, their greatest goal is to wreak as much mayhem and carnage on our human society, right? So we need to recognize the depth and the scale and how many people and entire cultures have this problem of being what Tom Montauk calls organic portals, where these hostile, malevolent forces and entities work through them to wreak havoc on civilization and society and revert it back to a very barbarous time. That's why they had walls in all these old settlements in the old days, to keep the barbarians out, to keep the savages in some nearby tribe coming and taking your women and children or killing them, right? And enslaving the people that they didn't kill. That's what walls were for. But now, literally and figuratively, symbolically, the walls have been torn down and the barbarians are being brought in. So, hang on to your hats, folks. It's getting really interesting. So, to our dear listeners out there, if you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to the cosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you at the top of the next segment.